12-383, offered by Mr. Cicilline of Rhode Island.
Pursuant to House Resolution 534, the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. A little over a year ago, when the Republican conference was meeting to discuss changes to the rules of the House for the 112th Congress, I offered a common-sense proposal. In a letter I sent to the chairman of the Rules Committee in January of 2011, I shared my belief that our priority in this Congress must be to enact legislation that will lead to job growth. I further stated that given our priority of job creation, the new rules of the 112th Congress should require disclosure of the impact on job creation of any legislation being considered by the full House. That was 1 year ago, and yet here we are today rehashing a seemingly age-old debate over trickle-down economics. And while we debate back and forth about whether H.R. 3582, the Pro-Growth Budgeting Act, is just another attempt to strengthen the case for passing large tax cuts while minimizing the actual costs, back home in my state, in the state of Rhode Island, more than 60,000 men and women are without jobs. And while we debate a bill with dim prospects of ever passing the Senate, more than 13 million Americans remain unemployed. Just as many of you have seen in your own districts, what I've seen firsthand in my district, the toll that this recession has taken on our families, our businesses, and our communities. My state was one of the first states in the Northeast to be hit by the recession, and like many other states, our recovery is slow, and with 10.8% unemployment, the toll continues. And that's why, 1 year later, I'm still here expressing the same urgent need for Congress to understand, as we consider legislation, whether our legislative actions will result in job creation or job loss. And this is precisely what my amendment would do. My amendment would strike the underlying language in H.R. 3582 and replace it with the text of the Jobs Score Act, which I introduced earlier in this session. This proposal would amend the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 to require that in addition to cost estimates, the Congressional Budget Office also prepare an estimate of the number of jobs which would be created, sustained, or lost by enactment of the legislation reported by the committee, including regional and state-level estimates. A companion to the Jobs Score Act has been introduced into the Senate with bipartisan support, Republicans and Democrats, a common-sense approach. There's no voodoo economics in this amendment. There's no controversial provisions requiring budget estimates that assume the extension of the Bush-era tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. My amendment would not require the inclusion of subjective and uncertain macroeconomic feedback in revenue estimates. This amendment goes beyond reviewing only major legislation and requires a jobs impact assessment for every bill that requires a formal CBO score. My amendment is simple, straightforward, and should be a proposal that any member who's serious about focusing on jobs can support. Given these challenging economic times and their profound impact on the lives of men, women, and families throughout America, we need to ensure that the policies deliberated in Congress include an evaluation of the impact on job creation. This amendment puts politics, partisanship, and controversial economic policy aside. Americans deserve to know whether the actions taken in Washington are likely to result in job creation or job loss, and my legislation will help provide Congress with this vitally important assessment. I reserve the balance of my time, and I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
The gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Chairman, I claim time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The gentleman from Rhode Island says that this is a simple proposition, and in that he's correct. It's simply terrible. What he does with this amendment is to take away the entire underlying bill. And then he has the audacity to say that the bill itself does not provide any constructive information for members. So I guess that what the member is saying is that an estimate of changes to economic output for legislation that we bring forward that is significant and has a huge effect on the gross domestic product, I guess that's not consequential. I guess that's not in order to be considered. I guess that means that the gentleman doesn't think that effect on employment. Oh, yes, Mr. Chairman, employment. On page 4, line 24 of the legislation. I guess the gentleman thinks that that's not important. that the dynamic consequences of legislation that's brought forward here that have significant effect on GDP ought not be considered. I guess the gentleman believes that tax revenue, not tax cuts, Mr. Chairman, as I have stated from this position all afternoon. Our friends on the other side seem to believe, in fact, the gentleman said that, quote, the bill would, quote, assume the inclusion of tax cuts, unquote. Well, Mr. Chairman, there's nothing in this bill that assumes any inclusion of tax cuts or tax reductions or tax increases. All that this says is that legislation that has a significant effect on our gross domestic product of 0.25%, which is about $40 billion, as has been talked about, that the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, our arm of the Congress that is providing us with information to be able to give us the most amount of information so that we can make the wisest decision, ought to look at these things in a dynamic way and look at economic output, look at employment, look at tax revenues. Is it going to be positive or negative? Is it going to affect the economy positively or negatively? Would that we would have done that over the past number of years, Mr. Chairman, maybe we would have made some better decisions. So it's important for members to appreciate that this amendment strikes the entire bill and inserts in its place something that I believe to be, for the bill, redundant, but incredibly and remarkably burdensome to the Congressional Budget Office. The macroeconomic analysis required by the base bill already requires an analysis of the effect of major legislation on employment and on labor supply. The entire point of the bill is that Congress ought to consider and have better information on the economic impact of major legislation that's being considered. The extension of this jobs analysis to every bill reported out of a House committee will generate an incredible amount of work and burden. For example, Mr. Chairman, if we oftentimes get criticized for naming post offices, we're going to assign somebody at the Congressional Budget Office to determine the jobs impact of renaming a post office. That's right. You talk about a redundant and worthless activity of the federal government, decreasing the efficiency of an already remarkably inefficient process at a time when we're appropriately decreasing spending at the federal level, which, yes, Mr. Chairman, also includes the Congressional Budget Office. Now, they're above where they were in the mid-portion of the last decade, but we're beginning to get that spending under control. This bill would indiscriminately add to the workload and provide really no new information to members of Congress. So my friend from Rhode Island is correct. This is a simple amendment. It is simply a terrible amendment and would completely end the underlying piece of legislation. So I urge defeat of the amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Rhode Island.
How much time do I have, Mr.
Minute
Chairman?
and a half.
And the amendment that I've offered in fact, does substitute the existing bill. And that's because, in fact, it is a terrible bill. And that's why I've proposed this amendment to substitute it, to avoid what the bill that is on the floor does. It avoids the partisanship, the controversial economic policy for which there's so much disagreement and for which we've heard about for the last hour. There's no hidden agendas to hide tax cuts while trying to use as a baseline the Bush tax cuts. It puts aside all of the disagreements that we just heard about for 1 hour and uses common sense. And I certainly suggest to my friend, the gentleman from Georgia, that in fact the single most important analysis we should be doing on every single bill that the CBO does an analysis of is jobs. Will this bill create jobs if we pass it? Will it cause us to the loss of jobs? That is the most urgent responsibility we have in Congress right now. This bill simply says that analysis should be done on every bill that the CBO does to say, will it create jobs? Will it cause the loss of jobs? Do that statewide and regionally. Why is that information valuable? Because we should be singularly focused on job creation. We should avoid the kind of partisanship that disputes about trickle-down economics, voodoo economics, about the tax policy, using the Bush tax cuts as the baseline. We need a common-sense approach. This simply says members of Congress should have the information and should know, does this create jobs or does it not, before making a decision. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia.
How much time remains?
45 seconds.
Mr. Chairman, the gentleman uses the appropriate buzzwords, trickle down and voodoo and partisanship and all that. The fact of the matter is none of that is in this bill. What's in this bill is an objective, common sense, common ground attempt to provide greater information to members of Congress. And his amendment strikes the entire underlying piece of legislation. Again, page 4, line 24. It calls on the CBO to address the issues of dynamism as it relates to macroeconomic factors when bills are coming to the floor. Unemployment, Mr. Chairman. I urge my colleagues to defeat this amendment and adopt the underlying bill and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. All times expired. The questions on adoption of the amendment. All in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair of the noes have it. Gentleman from Rhode Island.
Ask for a recorded vote.
Gentleman asks for a recorded vote pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Rhode Island will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in Part B of House Report 112-383, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 1 by Mr. Peters of Michigan, Amendment number 2 by Mr. Connolly of Virginia, Amendment number 4 by Ms. Fudge of Ohio, Amendment number 5, Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas, Amendment number 8, Mr. Cicilline of Rhode Island. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report 112-383 by the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Peters, upon which further proceedings were postponed, and upon which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-383, offered by Mr. Peters of Michigan.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and remain standing. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
The House this afternoon has been debating the first of 2 bills dealing with the federal budget process. David Hawkins of CQ writes these are the first 2 pieces of the 10-part Republican budget process overhaul package. This first bill would call for the Congressional Budget Office to analyze the impact of major legislation. This is a 15-minute vote on the first of 5 amendments to that bill. This is by Gary Peters of Michigan, and his amendment would add a finding section to the bill regarding the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts. For details on these 2 measures, we spoke this afternoon to a Capitol Hill reporter. Jonathan Nicholson is a budget reporter for Bloomberg BNA, covering the debate today. Why do House Republicans want to overhaul the congressional budget process?
Well, thanks for having me on. The conventional wisdom around Washington these days is that everyone's sort of suffering from, for lack of a better term, budget deal fatigue after last year with the super committee and the debt ceiling talks and so on. So kind of with the idea of major action out of the way or not possible this year, given it's the presidential election year, House Republicans are focused on trying to reform and overhaul the budget process, and these 2 bills are part of that. One of the bill would require a macroeconomic analysis of certain bills with a large budgetary impact, say about $40 billion. The other, and possibly more interesting bill, would change the way the baseline, the benchmark by which changes in law are measured, to basically scrap the automatic inflation adjustments that the CBO assumes that will happen with discretionary spending, which makes up about a little bit more than 1/3 of total federal spending annually.
What are we hearing from Democrats about these 2 bills, and do they also agree that the budget process itself needs fixing?
No one in general seems very happy with the budget process these days. The Senate has failed to pass a budget over there for about 3 years now. It's been probably a couple of years since there's been a joint budget between the House and Senate. On the other hand, the Democrats don't like these proposed changes with the caveat of the pro-growth budget bill, the one that deals with the macroeconomic analysis, is they're afraid that using that analysis, which would be supplemental but would not replace the usual CBO scores, they're afraid that that analysis would be used to make the argument that extending tax cuts or other kind of supply-side economic proposals would be made to look less expensive than they actually will be.
A lot of bills have passed here in the House, gone nowhere in the Senate. Does the same fate await these 2 bills when they make it out of the House today?
Quite possibly. I talked with Kent Conrad, the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, earlier today. He was non-committal on whether he would bring these up. He said he didn't rule it in or he didn't rule it out, but that they're focused now on preparing for a committee markup of a budget resolution, which probably wouldn't happen until March or April, probably.
That's the budget resolution for 2013.
Exactly.
What about are House Republicans working on any other bills that might change the budget process?
Yeah, these two are sort of the first of a package of about 10 bills that have been pushed. They're going to be pushed through the House Budget Committee, kind of at the behest of Paul Ryan. In addition to working on his own budget for FY13, he does want to use this year to try and make some changes and some tweaks to the budget process. The most notable one is actually one with some bipartisan support and bipartisan opposition that would give the president greater power to require Congress to vote up or down on individual spending items that have been sent up to him. The long name is expedited rescission. The shorter name is legislative line item veto, and that could possibly hit the House in coming weeks and may be an interesting floor vote.
Well, last year neither chamber agreed to a single budget proposal to govern the annual spending bills. What's the forecast this year? You mentioned Kent Conrad and the markup in the Senate side.
Yeah, Conrad has said that he intends to do a markup. He repeated that today in his committee. But basically, on whether that the product of that markup gets to the floor, he said is beyond his pay grade. The rules for debating a budget resolution are pretty wide open, and that's one of the reasons why Reid in the past has kind of has not wanted to take up a budget resolution, because basically it allows for all kinds of various votes on both sides, to try and make political points, or that's what he arguably sees as the political danger from that. Republicans make the point that if you can't budget, how can you govern? And that failing to pass a budget shows how gridlocked the Senate is under Democratic leadership.
Keeping an eye on the budget debate on Capitol Hill, Jonathan Nicholson, who covers budget issues for Bloomberg BNA. Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
And the first of 5 amendment votes on the House floor to the bill that deals with requiring the Congressional Budget Office to analyze the 40-year impact of major legislation, the first of 2 budget process bills that the House will consider. The second one coming up for general debate in just a bit. This is an amendment by Gary Peters, a Democrat of Michigan. Over in the Senate this afternoon, look for a final vote this afternoon on the Stock Act. That's the bill that explicitly bans lawmakers and their staff from trading on insider information. Amendment votes are underway now, with a final passage vote this afternoon and live coverage on C-SPAN 2. On the issue of budget and the economy, Congress heard from Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke today, also from the CBO Director Doug Elmendorf, and we covered both of those hearings. We also covered Attorney General Eric Holder, who testified on Capitol Hill again today on the Fast and Furious program. And we covered the House and Senate conference meeting today on the payroll tax cut extension and the extension of unemployment insurance benefits, and all of that later in our program schedule, and you can also see it in our video library. On the payroll tax cut extension, Nancy Pelosi says the clock is ticking for a payroll tax cut deal. She also said today she was critical, called the move by the Susan Komen Foundation to cut ties with Planned Parenthood as unfortunate. She said their collaboration with Planned Parenthood was one that benefited women's health, and I feel sad that this decision on their part is to the detriment of women's health. This on an afternoon that New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg announced a $250,000 donation to Planned Parenthood. Nancy Pelosi made those comments in her afternoon briefing with reporters, and we'll show you as much of that as we can as this first vote continues.
Good afternoon, everyone. The clock is ticking on the legislation for the payroll tax cut. We've made it clear our top priority is to give a tax cut to 160 million Americans, to extend unemployment benefits to those Americans who have lost their jobs through no fault of their own, and, of course, to make sure that our seniors have access to their doctor under Medicare. We have said that they should not be paid for, the tax cuts for the 160 million Americans shouldn't be paid for. We didn't pay for tax cuts for the wealthiest in America. I don't know why we have to pay them for the middle class. Unemployment benefits have not traditionally been paid for, but if they want to pay for them, we can start with a surcharge on the wealthiest in our country. We can look to the overseas contingency account to cover some of the cost. If they don't like that, we'd like to see what the Republicans have to offer. But we're not going to give to the middle class with one hand with the tax cut and unemployment benefits and take from them with another by having them have to cover the cost of their own tax cut. It's not fair to them, but it also undermines the stimulative effect of that money being injected into the economy and creating demand and therefore creating jobs. So hopefully this can happen soon. We believe it has to happen by February 17th in order to be ready for the deadline, the end of the month, meeting all of the Congressional Budget Office requirements. And that's what our motion to instruct conferees said last week, and that's what an overwhelming bipartisan vote was for. Also, this week we're very excited about the STOCK Act. President's mention of it in the State of the Union gave it a real boost. And so when we came back, first thing we did was to add co-sponsors to an already large list. We had 271 co-sponsors, of which 92 are Republicans. And then last evening when we went to the floor, had members sign a discharge petition. Right away, we have over 100 members who have signed it, and 2 of those are Republicans. So it's supported, as you know, by the Common Cause, Democracy 21, Public Citizen, U.S. Purge, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Government, and the American people. So we're very excited that the Leader Reid has said that the Senate will probably be taking up the bill by the end of the day, which, of course, means that hopefully we can take it up over here and have enough names on a discharge petition, even if it's not 218, but a persuasive number of co-sponsors. As I said, 271 bipartisan. For your information, we have handed out an auto industry report on Democratic action taken to bolster the American auto industry. We're very, very proud of this. At the time, as you know, well, maybe you don't know, 3 years ago in December, we passed legislation that was designed not as life support for the auto industry, but as a lifeline to them, establishing standards, enabling resources to be extended to them to bring our auto industry back. It serves as the framework for the President's proposal later because our bill did not pass the Senate. And just yesterday, we learned the news that Chrysler reported its first annual net profit since 1997. And we're pleased that General Motors is now once again the top automaker in the world, and we're proud to have brought the auto industry back, not only the automakers themselves, but all that goes into that in terms of their suppliers. We've made an investment that's paid off, saved nearly 1.5 million American jobs. It's a part of our Make It in America, Reignite the American Dream success. I want to salute the President for his courage in doing what he did by executive action because, as you may recall, it was not popular at the time, and people criticized the action, but nonetheless, it has paid off, and it is a job creator. I just want to close by talking once again about reform, since I saw you've done some more travel in the country, and the response continues to be overwhelming to the idea that part of the legacy those of us in public service must leave is one of a new politics free of special interest money. We want to be sure that the American people have all the knowledge they need to make a choice in an election, and that means we should disclose who makes these big, right now, secret, God knows where the money comes from, contributions, secret, unlimited contributions to campaigns, unreported. And we so disclose, and we'll be talking more about that next week under the leadership of Chris Van Hollen. Next, when we win, We want to reform the system. I get arousing applause when I say that we want to reform the system, and by doing so, we will elect many more women to Congress and to public office, because women will no longer be deterred by the concern about raising money or being drowned by the opposition in money that they use in campaigns. So it's not only women, it's minorities, it's unleashing many more resources that will make our political system, our governmental system, more wholesome. And then all along to talk about how we might amend the Constitution to overturn, I think, a decision that was very harmful to our democracy, that said special interest, unidentified sources could spend unlimited money to make their mark in a campaign. And they couple this with a flood of money and a suppression of the vote. So what we're talking about is how we offset that flood of money by the power of people's votes and their voices. And that means that we have to go out there and fight. And now about 36 states, where in half of them they've been successful already in instituting barriers to voter participation. We want to speak out against them, but we want to make sure that everyone who is eligible to vote does vote, and that that vote is counted. So I want to thank Chris Van Hollen for his work on the Disclose Act, and so many of our members on other parts of it, and Ted Deutsch of Florida on the amendment part. And I also, in closing, want to, getting back to the Stock Act, commend Congresswoman Louise Slaughter and Congressman Tim Walz for their leadership in just expediting all of this. So hopefully our own majority here will realize that this is an important bill that should be taken up now. With that, I'd be pleased to take any questions. Yes. Yes.
I'm just curious for your perspective. You may have read some of these articles about the infighting between Speaker Boehner and Leader Cantor, and similar stories were written about you when you were Speaker and Congressman Hoyer was Majority Leader. Does that just come with the post, or?
Well, let me first say I don't agree to the stipulation that similar stories. They may, I don't know, there may have been some inferences to be drawn from stories, but Mr. Hoyer and I always had a partnership. We were not just a team, we were a partnership. I know it's grist to the mill and people have fun interpreting one thing or another, but the kind of story that I think is out there now on the other side is they couldn't even decide who would walk into a room or this or that. Why that's interesting to me is that we need jobs legislation, and we don't need anything to stand in the way of that job creation. But you, yes.
G. Komen Foundation has decided they're going to cut off funding for Planned Parenthood because of an ongoing investigation by Cliff Stearns whether or not it funds abortion. As the most powerful elected female in the country, how do you feel about the Susan G. Komen Foundation decision to do that? And there are even some state legislators in California that said they will not wear pink anymore because they're so upset about that. Will you continue to wear pink in support of breast cancer?
My usual pink that I wear here all the time. Well, thank you for your question. An answer to it, how do I feel about it? That was the way you phrased it?
And how do you feel that?
I feel very sad. I feel very sad about it. I know the Susan G. Komen Foundation to be a very effective organization, very professionally run, and for a good purpose. I think their collaboration with Planned Parenthood, if that's the word, but whatever the connection was one that benefited women's health, and I feel sad that this decision on their part is to the detriment of women's health. But obviously, women are responding, and the Planned Parenthood is getting a tremendous show of support for people out there.
Do you think it's political by the Komen Foundation?
I have no idea. But I will say this, if the basic premise is that they can't be associated with anybody who's being investigated, it would be interesting to see who else they're associated with and whether they're investigated too, and that would be everybody from the NIH down the line. So if that is the standard, then I think they have to be consistent. But I know them to be an organization much admired, very professional, caring about women, and I find this to be unfortunate. But I don't attribute any motivation. I just don't know why they would do such a thing.
Yes. You mentioned payroll tax.
Yes, it is.
The doc fix exists, as you know, largely because back in 1997, Congress, in its wisdom, decided to use future cuts to doctors to give the appearance of a balance.
That would be the Republican majority in the Ways and Means Committee decided that got Chairman Thomas. It was wrong, yeah.
Okay, it was wrong in your words, and that's what you all are stuck with now. And then yesterday in the Budget Committee, when Ms. Castor asked Doug Elmendorf of CBO about using overseas contingency operations, which you said is a good place to get funds to help pay for this bill, he said, well, basically no such fund exists, and instructed her that really that money doesn't exist. Should the public be concerned overall about the budget process around here and what appear to be, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, what appear to be shell games to cover budgets? Because that's what appears to be going on both sides.
Well, the CBO did take in consideration the overseas contingency account with the Ryan budget. So I refer you to that. Should the American people be concerned about the budget process here? I think the American people, first and foremost, should be concerned about the budget priorities that we debate here. We believe the budget should be a statement of our national values. What we believe in as a country should be reflected in how we allocate our resources and how we are fiscally responsible for future generations. I think they should be concerned about giving tax cuts to the wealthiest people in our country without paying for them, or just giving them to them, period, because they are not job creating, which brings revenue in. So I think the main concern is about what are the resources that we are calling upon, how are they being allocated, how do they grow the economy, how do they educate our children, how do they keep America number one, and at the same time, how are we fiscally sound? I think that is more the concern. But you can't have OCO counting one day and not counting another.
But you're convinced that it's real money? Okay.
I think that it can be as justified as it was in the Paul Ryan budget. And may I just say that, hearkening back to your basic premise, I didn't hear a lot of hooting and hollering on the part of the budget hawks out there when Chairman Bill Thomas, then the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, decided on this gimmickry, which far outdoes any other sleight of hand that you might reference. Yes, sir.
The administration has issued a regulation that will require all health care plans to cover sterilization and all FDA-approved contraceptives, including those that induce abortions. This would force Catholic individuals and institutions to act against their consciences. All across the nation, Catholic bishops... Is this a speech, or do we have a question in disguise as a... We will not comply with this law. Catholic bishops are saying they will not comply with this law. Will you stand with your fellow Catholics in resisting this law? Or will you stick by the administration? First of all, I'm going to stick with my fellow Catholics in supporting the administration on this. I think it was a very courageous decision that they made, and I support it. Yes, ma'am.
Republicans have been blaming the administration for saying that the U.S. will end its combat role in Afghanistan in the next year, and saying that this is just playing election year politics. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that is the decision well, I don't know if it's a decision, but the timetable that Secretary Panetta has put forth is consistent with what the President has said all along, that we will by and large have our combat troops out of or change of mission in Afghanistan by 2014, and this is the logical thing you would do on that path. So I fully support what Secretary Panetta has put forth. It is consistent with the policy that has been put forth, which is that we will reduce our involvement there by 2014, in addition to what the President promised and said about Iraq, and now we're out.
Republicans in the House and Senate have introduced legislation. Thank you. Introduced legislation to undo the defense portion of the sequester and the budget control agreement. Is that okay with you? And does that open the door?
Is that okay with me? No.
To introduce legislation to undo the sequester on spending cuts that they don't want?
Now you're really talking skullduggery. Okay? You're really talking skullduggery here. A commitment was made an agreement was reached, and I think it is wrong for them to say we're just not going to honor the commitment, and we're certainly not going to honor it on one side. How do they expect to make up for the deficit reduction that is gained? We had an opportunity to do something big. The super committee had the opportunity to do something at least $4 trillion or more. They could have started with the entrepreneurial spirit of America to grow our economy, promoting small businesses and the rest, and then had a revenue side and an investment side that reinforced that. It would certainly have involved some difficult cuts on the one hand and some need to pull in revenue on the other side. They understood what the consequences were. They agreed to the consequences, and they thought that they could walk away from all the deficit reduction that was possible in that, and now say, well, forget about deficit reduction altogether when it comes to the defense budget. I think that when an agreement was reached, it must be honored.
A follow-up to that.
Yes, sir.
In respect to delaying it for a year, Senator McCain is suggesting.
I think that we made an agreement. We have to proceed with it. I don't like it. I would have hoped it would have been a motivator for the Republicans to understand that you cannot have the serious deficit reduction that we need to have unless you do not have tax cuts for the rich, which have not produced anything but a deeper deficit for us, and that there are certain tax subsidies, like as for big oil, et cetera, that really we could have done away with in order to reduce the deficit in a very big way, which would have enabled us to make all kinds of compromises because everybody was part of making sacrifice. Instead, we had just kick the can down the road, now kick the can down the road, now kick the can down the road. No.
Last question. You've made the case from the beginning that President Obama inherited a bad economic situation
He did.
from President George
Yes.
W. Bush. Do you think, though, at this point, Harry Reid, yourself, and President Obama should take ownership for the current state of the economy?
I think we should take ownership for the fact that the unemployment rate would be 15% without the actions that we took to create jobs. President Obama did inherit a mess of a magnitude unseen since the time of the Great Depression, and we would have been close to a depression had he not won the election and taken the actions he and the Democratic Congress did. Remember, a meltdown of our financial institutions of a global magnitude, which was drastic, required intervention on the part of the taxpayer with no commensurate cooperation back in terms of lending to grow the economy. This happened and had accompanying it a loss of revenue into the Treasury because of the impact on the economy. At the same time, you had tax cuts to the wealthiest people in our country. You had a giveaway to the pharmaceutical industry that was to the hundreds of billions of dollars, and you had 2 unpaid-for wars, deepening the deficit, a very deep deficit, meltdown of the financial crisis, and policies that did not grow the economy. And so the president inherited that. He was a job creator. President Obama was a job creator on day one. I've probably said this to you before, but just in case, I think it bears repeating. A job creator from day one. In his inaugural address, he called for swift, bold action now. And 1 week and 1 day after his speech, the House of Representatives passed the Economic Recovery Act, which even the CBO says has saved or created over 3 million jobs. And again, we talked about the auto industry and how his actions there, not popular at the time, you will recall, but effective nonetheless. Cash for clunkers, initiatives like that added to it, and measures to make sure that this does not happen again with the Wall Street.
44, the amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report 1112-383 by the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-383, offered by Mr. Connolly of Virginia.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and remain standing. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The underlying bill would require the Congressional Budget Office to analyze the 40-year economic impact of major legislation. Jerry Connolly's amendment, his proposed amendment, would extend the requirement for the Congressional Budget Office to prepare analysis of major legislation to bills or resolutions that are reported by the appropriations committees of both the House and Senate. This is a 2-minute vote. 3 more 2-minute amendment votes will follow this. There is some personnel news out of Congress this afternoon. National Journal and other Capitol Hill publications reporting that Congressman Heath Shuler plans to retire and will not seek re-election, according to sources close to the candidate. That report from National Journal. Roll call says that if that's the case, Heath Shuler would make the 19th member of the House to retire without seeking other office.
Are 177. The nays are 237. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 4, printed in Part B of House Report 112-383 by the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Fudge, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-383, offered by Ms. Fudge of Ohio.
The request for a recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and remain standing. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
Democrat Marcia Fudge of Ohio has an amendment which would add income equality among the variables to be used to determine the economic impact of the bill. The underlying bill requires the Congressional Budget Office to do that, an analysis of 40-year economic impact of major legislation. 2 more amendment votes will follow, and then we expect a Democratic motion to recommit and final passage. And then the House will move on to an hour of general debate on another bill dealing with the budget process, this one that would require the Budget Office to base their projections on current tax policy and not account for inflation or expiring tax cuts.
Yeas are 171. The nays are 243. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on amendment number 5, printed at Part B of House Report 112-383, offered by the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, upon which further proceedings were postponed, or upon which the noes prevailed. By voice vote, the clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-383, offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for recorded vote will rise and remain standing. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
The House finishing up amendment votes on a bill that would require the Congressional Budget Office to analyze the economic impact of major legislation. Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas with an amendment that would require the CBO, as part of their analysis of the potential impact, to look upon the impact of historically underutilized business zones, or hub zones, as defined by the Small Business Administration.
On this vote, the yeas are 175, the nays are 243. The amendment is not. On this vote, the yeas are 173, the nays are 243. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 8, printed in Part B of House Report 112-383 by the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline, upon which further proceedings were postponed, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute printed in Part B of House Report number 112-383, offered by Mr. Cicilline of Rhode Island.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 2-minute vote.
And it's the last amendment vote. This is the Democratic substitute. David Cicilline's amendment would strip the language from the underlying bill, replace it with substitute language, saying that the Congressional Budget Office had to include in its official cost estimates an estimate of the number of jobs that would be created, sustained, or lost by the proposed legislation. Last amendment vote, the Democratic motion to recommit is likely next and final passage.
On this
Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller of North Carolina votes aye. Mr. Becerra. Mr. Becerra votes aye. Mr. Canseco. Mr. Canseco votes no. Mr. Ross of Arkansas. Mr. Ross of Arkansas votes aye. Mr. Davis of Kentucky. Mr. Davis of Kentucky votes no.
On this vote, the yeas are 174, the nays are 245. The amendment is not adopted. The question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Accordingly, under the rule, the committee rises.
Mr. Chair.
On the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 3582 and pursuant to House Resolution 534, I report the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 3582 and pursuant to House Resolution 534 reports the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. Is a separate vote demanded on the amendment to the amendment reported by the Committee of the Whole? If not, the question is on adoption of the amendment in the nature of substitute as amended. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, third reading.
A bill to amend the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 to provide for a macroeconomic analysis of the impact of legislation.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
House will be in order. Is the gentleman from Iowa opposed to the bill?
I oppose the bill in its current form.
Gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Boswell of Iowa moves to recommit the bill H.R. 3582 to the Committee on the Budget with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. After Section 407B of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 as added by Section 2, insert the following new subsection C and redesignate succeeding subsections accordingly. C. Impacts on Medicare benefits, beneficiaries, the Social Security and Medicare trust funds. The Director of the Congressional Budget Office shall prepare for each major bill or resolution reported by any committee of the House of Representatives or the Senate, except the Committee on Appropriations of such House, as a supplement to estimates prepared under Section 402, an impact analysis of the budgetary effects of such bill or resolution on Medicare benefits, beneficiaries, the Social Security and Medicare trust funds for the 10 fiscal year period beginning with the first fiscal year for which an estimate was prepared under Section 402 in each of the next 3 10 fiscal year periods. The Director shall submit to such committee the impact analysis together with the basis for the analysis. As a supplement to the estimates prepared under Section 402, all such information so submitted shall be included in the report accompanying such bill or resolution.
The gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me be clear. The passage of this amendment will add protections for America's seniors to the bill. It will not, I repeat, it will not prevent the passage of the underlying bill. If it's adopted, the amendment will be incorporated into the bill and the bill will be immediately voted upon. My motion to recommit will protect Medicare and Social Security beneficiaries and repair, yes, repair the trust between seniors in this body. The Republican leadership has, for more than a year, promised that slash and burn legislation would revitalize this nation and empower employers. Well, we're still waiting on millionaire job creators to show us the jobs. To date, we have seen nothing from the Republican Party that would encourage job growth stabilize the American family, or help seniors pay for their Medicare. Instead, the policies we have seen attempt to take from hard-working Americans the assistance they have been promised and that they have paid into their entire working careers throughout their life. Last year, we were promised legislation that would fuel job growth. We ended up with a budget that would pay for a tax break for the wealthy by dismantling Medicare. Instead of providing the benefits these workers had earned, the Republican budget attempted to charge seniors higher premium costs for fewer benefits. Seniors were let down when this plan had enough Republican support to pass the chamber. Like me, again, seniors will be disheartened once more when the Republican budget on the floor next month again attempts to end Medicare. Seniors have a right to know when their benefits are being cut or when their Social Security trust funds are being drained. They should not have to fear each day when this chamber's leadership is going what it's going to do to their benefits. American seniors have the right to know. That is why we are offering this amendment today, to ensure that Iowa's 450,000 plus seniors know when legislation could tamper with their hard-earned benefits. This amendment will side with our seniors by requiring an assessment of each bill to show how it will affect the programs our seniors rely on. Voting for this amendment will prove to the American seniors that you are on their side and that you care about the programs that made this country great. The greatest success of Medicare and Social Security is that, in a time of need, these programs brought Americans over the age of 60 out of poverty and ensured their access to care. These programs honor America's work ethic and the communities that we build together. This amendment would provide peace of mind by ensuring that any attempt to change Social Security, Medicare, and the Medicare Trust Fund will be reported to Congress and the public. Should a bill harm the solvency of the trust fund, lessen the benefits owed to American workers, or command seniors to pay more in premium costs, our seniors will know. Americans who are enrolled in Social Security and Medicare have paid into these programs throughout their entire careers, and they have helped to make this country what it is today. It is our responsibility to work together and preserve the structure of Medicare. We must provide America's seniors with a viable safety net and insurance plan for their future. So I will continue to fight for proposals that strengthen Medicare and the benefits that American retirees have worked for throughout their lives. I hope you will join me, and I urge all of my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment. I yield back.